Christopher Nolan's Odyssey has just come out, and as an archaeologist, I am super excited. See, the hero of Homer's epic, Odysseus, journeys all across the Aegean Sea, visiting wondrous places from the ancient city of Troy to the Isles of the Cyclops, all the way to his island kingdom of Ithaca. The Odyssey was created about 2,700 years ago, and it tells a story set another 500 years before. Although they're part of an ancient mythological story, many of these places are actual, real locations you can still visit today. Plus, they're the sites of some ridiculously cool archaeology. In fact, some artifacts even raise the question, was Odysseus based on a real person? We'll delve into that later. To begin, we have a real-life starting point for Odysseus' journey, so we can trace his path, identify the real locations that he visited, and figure out where myth meets real history. Now, before we get started, an apology to the fine people of Greece. I'm bound to mispronounce some of these names and places, and I'm trying my best, I promise, but I'm sorry in advance for the inevitable butchering of your beautiful language. With that being said, are you ready? Let's dig in. In Homer's epic poem, Odysseus starts his long journey home after defeating the city of Troy. In the trailer for the new Odyssey movie, it shows the fall of Troy and the Greek soldiers sneaking out of the Trojan horse. That's interesting, because the Trojan horse only appears briefly in Homer's Odyssey. Also, sadly, no archaeologist or historian has ever proved there really was a Trojan horse. There are so many fantastical elements to these ancient myths that it's hard to parse what's real and what isn't. In Homer's poem, Odysseus' journey home starts after the Battle of Troy. Up until the 19th century, some classical historians had largely written Troy off as sort of a fable, while some people made the pilgrimage to an area called the Troad in northwest Turkey. In 1822, Scottish journalist Charles MacLaren decided to test this theory and suggested an actual location for Homer's Troy. This was a large mound in northwestern Turkey, known to locals as Hisarlik. It was a radical idea, and honestly, the archaeological world kind of laughed him out of there. So nothing happened for a few decades. Not until Frank Calvert, a British diplomat with a passion for archaeology, got involved. He convinced archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann to take a look at Hisarlik, and exploratory excavations began. Schliemann would eventually take full credit for adopting MacLaren's idea when it was discovered to be correct. Classic. Don't worry, Calvert and MacLaren would get their credit too, a good 100 years after they'd both died. In 9 separate digs across 1870 to 1890, Schliemann's team would begin to unearth the remains of a massive walled citadel, and it quickly became apparent that MacLaren had been spot on. So now we know where Troy is. The next question is defining its actual size. Was Troy the vast, expansive metropolis Homer described? In the Odyssey, the city of Troy is a cultural and economic jewel of civilization. But the Odyssey also has a Cyclops and sea monsters, so perhaps it's not an entirely reliable source. We might need to assess for ourselves just how grand and large a settlement Troy was. Homer could easily have talked it up just for the sake of scale. Fortunately, continued excavations at the Hisarlik mound revealed something very interesting. In true archaeological fashion, there were huge swathes of debris accumulated on top of each other in very distinct layers, 9 layers of debris, representing 9 different periods, where housing in the city was built, occupied, and destroyed. The layering of this debris revealed a pattern of behavior amongst the Trojans. When their settlement was destroyed through fires, earthquakes, or both, they simply leveled the wreckage flat and rebuilt on top of it, like a lasagna. Or, given we're talking about a Greek myth, maybe I should say a delicious moussaka. Each of the 9 layers indicates a different period of Troy Hisarlik history. This means that there have been 9 versions of the city built consecutively over the same spot, spanning the many centuries since it was first constructed, all stacked on top of the same area. So what about the version of Troy that Homer was writing about? The archaeological evidence shows that by the late Bronze Age, the time that the Odyssey was set, Troy was a large citadel enclosed behind impressive walls with a large settlement in the lower town. So maybe Homer wasn't too far off. Kind of insane, right? Well, we could talk for ages about Troy, but that's only stop number 1 of my list. This mythical land of the Lotus Eaters was a tribe Odysseus encountered during his return journey from Troy to Ithaca. Odysseus' ship is blown by a northerly wind up to the coast of Tunisia. There, he encounters a race of people who enjoy a local practice of eating lotus flowers, indigenous to the island. Eating them induces a blissful forgetfulness that makes getting the men back to their ships a little bit difficult. So, where is this mythical land of narcotic flowers likely to be in the real world? The leading candidate is an island called Jerba, off the coast of Tunisia, in the Gulf of Gabes. The classical associations were made clear pretty early. The ancient historian Herodotus, from around 2,500 years ago, specifically located the lotus eaters on the North African coast, near modern-day Tunisia and Libya. It just so happens that the island of Jerba is in this area. Jerba aligns with the trajectory of Odysseus' journey after leaving Troy, as it's relatively close to the Gulf of Gabis, consistent with a journey blown off course by strong winds. Plus, the topography of Jerba is sandy beaches and lagoons with a relaxed, leisurely atmosphere. It matches the mythological description of the sort of place that induces forgetfulness and a desire to stay forever. So it's got the look of Homer's island, and it's also got the location. Now onto the best bit, the archaeology. Excavations of the island have revealed that Jerba hosts the ancient port city of Meninx, a place settled in the 4th century BC, initially as a simple maritime trading post. As the city expanded, it eventually became famous for a purple dye industry, evidenced by piles of crushed sea snail shells around the site. That's right, the ancient world got its purple hues from crushed sea snail shells. So how far did the city expand? Well, interestingly, a joint Tunisian-German archaeological project conducted in 2017 and 2018 used geomagnetometry to map out the island. They found a large market, confirming the city conducted trade, but they also found evidence for jetties and quays, now underwater, about 80 meters off the current coastline. The results were clear. Meninx was a large, thriving Punic-era trading post, confirming Jerba as a major seafaring spot, the kind that Homer described. So what about the lotus flowers? Were there really dream-inducing narcotic plants on Jerba like there are in Homer's story? While Homer's dream flowers are mythical, the real-world equivalent is thought to be the Sisyphus lotus, better known as the Mediterranean jujube. It's a thorny shrub that produces a small, sweet, slightly sour fruit with a flavor crossed somewhere between a date and an apple, and it's native to North Africa. So crucially, for our trail of clues, it's native to Meninx. The local populations were named the lotophages, or the lotus eaters, and they would make all sorts of things with these fruits, from bread to liqueur. They're quite sweet, which means that there are fermentable sugars in these fruits. That would definitely induce some form of blissful forgetfulness. So maybe it wasn't so much narcotic flower as it was alcoholic fruit. What do you think? Do you think Odysseus' crew ate the fermented fruit and he had to be the designated driver? Let me know in the comments below. The mythical island of the Cyclops is where Odysseus and his crew, while continuing their journey home from the Trojan Wars, run into a storm sent by Zeus. Blown off course, they make land at a strange island. It had been a long journey, and Odysseus, knowing of the Greek tradition of hospitality, hoped the island's inhabitants could help them out. He took a team of his best men and started exploring the island, soon finding himself a cave full of cheese and lambs. The men suggested they take the supplies and flee, but Odysseus insisted they wait to meet the cave's owner in the hope they'd be treated to more. This sounds a bit wild to us, to wait it out and get more food, but bear in mind this is a deeply held ancient Greek custom, and observing traditions was crucial to remaining in the gods' favor. Unfortunately, this really didn't work out for Odysseus and his crew. The cave was owned by the Cyclops Polyphemus, who returns to his cave, traps the crew, and eats 2 of the men. Not the kind of hospitality he had in mind. I was wondering how they'd depict the Cyclops in the new movie, so it's great to see one pop up in the trailer. You just get a quick glimpse of a large, creepy figure gripping what looks like a soldier, probably about ready to chow down. It'd take clever trickery, a lot of wine, and an invasive case of ocular surgery for Odysseus to escape. But not before the Cyclops would curse his name to Poseidon, throwing huge rocks at his fleeing ship, and beseech the gods to curse Odysseus on his return voyage home. So that's the story. But let's talk location. How do we credibly identify something as unique as an island filled with multiple giant Cyclopses? Homer never directly declares a real-world inspiration for the island. However, there are clues that can help us find a worthy candidate. And it all starts in the geology. The Cyclopses of Greek myth are a forge people, associated with the blacksmith god Hephaestus. They've long been associated with heat and fire, which is why classical archaeologists place the story by Mount Etna, an active volcano on the southernmost tip of Sicily. Sicily would sit along the likely course of Odysseus' voyage, and Mount Etna's volcanic soil would result in a lush, verdant landscape to match Homer's descriptions. Another one of Sicily's Cyclopean associations, try saying that 10 times, has more archaeological roots. Millions of years ago, during the Pleistocene, Mediterranean regions like Sicily were common habitats for the dwarf elephant. These would have been extinct long before Greek civilization arrived, but their bones and their skulls would have been preserved in caves or buried in eroding cliff faces. Why does this matter? Well, take a look. If you were an ancient Greek sailor or a shepherd with no concept of prehistoric or extinct animals, what would you think if you saw this skull buried in the rock? And if that isn't enough for you, what about the Isole dei Cyclopi, the Cyclopean Isles? These are rows of basaltic columns piled on top of each other. The ancient interpretation is that these rocks, whose volcanic composition matches that of mainland Sicily, were the very same ones thrown by the blind Cyclops as he raged at the escape of Odysseus and cursed his name to the sea god Poseidon. That's it for the island of the Cyclops. The location and dwarf elephant evidence are circumstantial, but could it amount to something with a bit more digging? There are other sites that could use some digging as well. Next up, we have some honorable mentions. These next two are locations where we have a working theory, but the archaeology isn't quite there to know for sure. Further ahead in the story, we have the island of Ogygia, home of the nymph Calypso. At this point of the story, Odysseus has lost the entirety of his crew and has been shipwrecked through the maelstrom of Charybdis. From what we've seen, it looks like Charybdis will also appear in the Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey. However, from the trailer, you can only see a huge whirlpool. I wonder if the sea monster will even appear. Odysseus finally reaches the shores of Ogygia after 10 days adrift at sea. Beaten, starved, and both physically and psychologically broken, he's found by Calypso, who, shall we say, takes a bit of a shine to him. Calypso the nymph is played by Charlize Theron in the movie, which I think is a pretty good fit. She nurses Odysseus back to health in the divine paradise of Ogygia, which Homer describes as a sensory masterpiece. He calls it a place so overwhelming in its perfection that a deathless god who came there would be seized by its wonder and delight. Calypso would keep Odysseus there, and he'd soon see her paradise as a gilded cage. It would be 7 years before the messenger Hermes successfully convinced Calypso to allow Odysseus to leave. He rejects the infinite, static paradise she offers him, instead choosing the flawed life of a mortal and the wrinkles of his beloved Penelope. Aww. Okay, that's it for the story. Let's find out where this sensory masterpiece is. And for that, we turn to the island of Gozo, the second largest island of the Maltese archipelago. And nearly adjoining Malta, Gozo has long been heavily associated with Homer's vision of an island paradise. In fact, Gozo's identification as Ogygia dates back to antiquity. Scholars and poets, including Callimachus of Cyrene in the 3rd century BC, considered it the navel of the seas, a mysterious place at the edge of the known world. To top it off, we're even given a cave, locally referred to as Calypso's Cave. Overlooking the red sands of Ramla Bay, it could easily have inspired the shores upon which Odysseus found himself after his 10 days adrift in the Aegean Sea. Or it's to bring tourists in, or to place a red herring for archaeological YouTube channels. The connection of Gozo to Ogygia is largely through mythical association. The cave itself is naturally formed and currently closed due to frequent landslides. But that doesn't mean there isn't cool archaeology in the area, even if it's not so directly related to the Odyssey. For example, Gozo is host to the unbelievable Gigantea temples, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and dated back somewhere between 3,200 and 3,600 BCE. These colossal limestone Neolithic temples are some of the oldest freestanding structures in the world. The name Gigantea means Temple of the Giants, inspired from the local myth that only giants could have built the temples from the giant limestone boulders that make up both structures, some of which weigh over 50 tons. Archaeologists have since discovered the most likely explanation for how these stones were transported. Hundreds of limestone balls were found near the site of both temples. The working theory is that these were used as ball bearings, our Neolithic ancestors transporting the giant building blocks with planks raised on these limestone balls. How cool is that? This is the land of the mythical Phaeacians, and also the final stop before Odysseus is home. Leaving Ogygia and Calypso aboard his homemade raft, Odysseus once again runs afoul of Poseidon. That guy just did not want Odysseus to return home. Once again, our hero is shipwrecked, or raft-wrecked, I suppose, and once again, he washes ashore in a new land, disheveled, barely conscious, and alone. This time, he's in Scheria, where the Princess Nausicaa delivers him to her family. The king and queen, known for their Phaeacian hospitality, feed, clothe, and entertain Odysseus. He tells them of his adventures in his attempt to return home, and the king, moved by his story, provides him with a crew and a ship steered by pure thought to take Odysseus home to Ithaca. Unfortunately, their kindness incurs the wrath of Poseidon, who, upon realizing the Phaeacians have successfully returned Odysseus home, turned the returning Phaeacian crew and their ship to stone, rooting them to the seabed forever. So it goes that the Phaeacians vowed to never again provide travelers safe passage in an attempt to appease Poseidon. It seems no good deed goes unpunished if you're an angry sea god. Today, we're largely agreed that this most likely real-world location of Scheria is the Greek island of Corfu. Ancient accounts from Thucydides proclaim Scheria to be Corcyra, the ancient name of Corfu. It also makes sense in terms of Odysseus' journey. Ithaca is within a day's sailing from Corfu, matching the timeline of Odysseus' hasty depositing on the shores of his kingdom. To top it off, the locals claim that the irregularly shaped islet Ponticonisi, or Mouse Island, is in fact the stone remains of the ship Poseidon cursed on its return journey. Have a look for yourself. Reckon that looks like a ship? Another thing to tie Corfu to the seafaring nation of Homer's descriptions is the archaeology. It's here we can find the ancient city Corcyra, Corfu's ancient name, which together with Athens and Corinth was one of the three great naval powers of ancient Greece. The ancient port of Alkanu was first discovered back during a project led by Corfu's Effort of Antiquities. It took about 10 years to unearth major physical evidence of a commercial and military port. The greatest achievement, though, were the ship sheds, or neosoikoi, a massive complex of ship warehouses all 40 meters long. But the discoveries don't stop there. In the early 2010s, a group of researchers used a series of modern techniques like vibrocoring and geophysical survey to map the entirety of the buried port, which revealed 2 stratigraphic disruptions consistent with tsunami activity. It's very likely that if this port was indeed the naval epicenter of Corcyra, it was likely destroyed by these tsunamis, which means we not only have a full map of the port, but we have a working explanation for its demise, all while it still remains buried. I mean, mind-blowing. That's it for the honorable mentions. I thought we'd save the best for last on this one. The island kingdom of Odysseus, Ithaca. When we reach Ithaca, this is the culmination of Odysseus' journey, the restoration of his power, and the realization of his revenge. The story goes that Odysseus returned after his 20-year voyage, only to find his palace disgraced and usurped by would-be suitors to his queen, Penelope. From watching the trailer to the new movie, these suitors seem to be represented by the character Antinous, played by Robert Pattinson, who gives young Tom Holland, aka Odysseus' son Telemachus, a hard time. In Homer's epic poem, Odysseus used clever deception and his masterful archery to reclaim his palace from over 100 would-be interlopers before heroically having them all slaughtered. Lovely. I wonder if Christopher Nolan decided to include that part in the movie. So we know what happened on Odysseus' home island, the staging ground of his ultimate revenge. But what do we know about the real Ithaca? And did Odysseus' palace really exist? You might be thinking, this is easy. We know where Ithaca is. Yes, there's an island called Ithaca close to Kefalonia off the west coast of mainland Greece. It even has a landmark called the Palace of Odysseus. However, as with everything in history, it's not always that simple. And I've got to be careful what I say because we're entering some pretty shark-infested waters here. Or should that be siren-infested waters? Because the location of Homer's Ithaca has been debated by historians and archaeologists for centuries. And things have really heated up in recent decades. In one corner of the historical boxing ring, we have the experts who believe that Ithaca from the Odyssey is the same island we call Ithaca today, while in the other corner are a whole bunch of experts who argue that, well, it can't be there. So let's delve into the island of Ithaca. For the last 200 years, modern Ithaca has attracted a lot of attention from archaeologists. Many of the early excavations focused on the slopes of the Aetos mountain in the center of the island, where archaeologists hoped they'd find the palace of Odysseus. They struggled to come across anything definitive, but it was while excavating in this area that they unearthed bronze coins that were said to depict the head of Odysseus. From the coins I've seen, I'm surprised they could tell it was the Greek hero. Perhaps it was meant to be someone else? At least one was also marked with the word Ithacon, meaning of Ithaca. More of what these Odysseus coins could mean a bit later. Then, in the 1990s, an archaeological team from the University of Ioannina turned their attention instead to a site in the north, confusingly called the School of Homer. The ruins were apparently given the name as a bit of a prank by a local priest centuries ago, a scholarly joke. And just to clear things up, There's no evidence that Homer ever attended or taught at a school in Ithaca, but just in case it turned out to be useful, the team decided to dig. Led initially by the archaeological duo L Kontorli-Papadopoulou and Thanasis Papadopoulos, the team did end up making some groundbreaking discoveries. They discovered a complex of buildings arranged on 2 terraces, dating as far back as the Bronze Age. That's the time the Odyssey is set. They were even able to date an underground spring to the second half of the 13th century BCE. That's more than 3,000 years ago. And amazingly, within their found artifacts was a clay tablet. On it, you can make out figures on a ship, and looming over them is a large creature that looks suspiciously like a rabbit or a dog. Some have said that you can make out one of the little figures tied to a mast. I can't quite see it personally, but it has led people to question, is this showing the part of Homer's tale where Odysseus has to navigate past the deadly sirens or the sea monster Scylla? After collecting a wealth of evidence, eventually Thanasis Papadopoulos made a game-changing statement. The site, formerly known as the School of Homer, was a strong candidate for the Homeric palace of Odysseus. This was massive news. Just the fact they felt confident enough to publicly put the site forward as potentially Odysseus's palace was a big deal. This is a site that archaeologists have been searching for centuries. Safe to say that many of the locals have decided this is absolutely true, because you can now even find the palace of Odysseus on Google Maps. However, remember when I said it's not that simple? There are experts who argue that this is pure nonsense and there's simply not enough evidence. Some sources claim that modern Ithaca is a perfect fit for the Ithaca that we read about in the Odyssey. That's quite odd, because there are those who say that the Ithaca we know today doesn't resemble Homer's description at all. In the Odyssey, Homer describes how Ithaca lies low and away, the furthest out to sea, rearing into the western dusk, while the others face the east and breaking day. Mine is a rugged land, but good for raising sons, and I myself, I know no sweeter sight on earth than a man's own native country. But, as you can see, modern-day Ithaca can hardly be called the farthest out to sea. It's just off the inside coast of Kephallonia. Plus, its rugged and rocky landscape hardly sounds like it's lying low. So where do these other scholars think the real ancient Ithaca is today? Several candidates have been floated around, including the island of Lefkada, which was proposed by German archaeologist Wilhelm Dörpfeld in the early 1900s. It's a large island just north of modern-day Ithaca. In the early 2000s, someone named Robert Biddleston threw his weight behind another contender. While he wasn't technically a qualified historian, his research launched a real cat amongst the pigeons, or siren amongst the sailors. After analyzing archive material and traveling to Greece to examine the islands for himself, he announced that Odysseus's home was not on the modern Ithaca, but instead on its neighboring island of Kephallonia. To the northwest of Kephallonia is a peninsula called Peliki. It's here that Biddleston claimed was the site of Homer's Ithaca. Biddleston said he'd found evidence that water had previously divided the land, so what's currently a peninsula had, at some point, been an island. He reported finding deep ravines, some of them more than 90 meters deep, suggesting an ancient waterway. Plus, when his crew dug deep into the ground, they reported they'd found not solid limestone, but loose rockfall. He suggested that this rockfall was thanks to earthquakes and landslides. It's all exactly what he'd hoped to find to prove his island theory. I'll be honest, it's not really good enough for me. I want artifacts. I want house foundations, not a place where there was potentially an island. But to his credit, Biddleston was an enthusiast who really cared, and he put the time in to find out an answer. And he could be right. Maybe we should go dig there and see if there's anything to prove his theory. This has happened before, after all. It would be a mistake to ignore a theory just because someone doesn't have the correct qualifications. With that attitude, we may never have discovered the Anglo-Saxon ship at Sutton Hoo, and Richard III might still be hidden under a parking lot in Leicester. So, do we know where the real Ithaca, Homer's Ithaca, is? The answer seems to be not just yet. As ancient philosopher and geographer Eratosthenes allegedly said, "You will find the scene of the wanderings of Odysseus when you find the cobbler who sewed up the bag of the winds." So, best of luck. But wait, you might be thinking, if we're looking for the real Ithaca and the real palace of Odysseus, does that mean Odysseus was real? It's a good question. Okay, imagine that all archaeologists band together and agree that we have in fact found the site of Homer's Ithaca. and the palace from his epic poem. This doesn't necessarily mean that Odysseus is real. That's like saying that the discovery of London's King's Cross station proves the existence of the Hogwarts Express. Ithaca could simply be a location where Homer set his character's Bronze Age home instead of a place where an actual guy named Odysseus was from. A better comparison might be King Arthur. So many artifacts and sites relating to him have been found throughout history, but there's no real evidence to support that he ever actually existed. He's a fictional character. At most, the legends of King Arthur might have been inspired by a real warlord from early British history. Perhaps a similar thing has happened here with Odysseus. The discovery of artifacts alluding to the Greek legend on the Ionian Islands, like the coins and the tablet, isn't hard proof of his actual existence. It's more likely evidence of hero worship. In fact, some experts have argued that the site to the north of modern Ithaca was home to a sanctuary to Odysseus. It's possible that he was worshipped as a hero in centuries following Homer writing the Odyssey. Rather than being proof that Odysseus was real, the discovery of artifacts and ruins associated with him tells us more about Homer and how the ancient Greek world interacted with these legends. It's funny to think that, thousands of years after people were possibly idolizing Odysseus, we're still at it. Rather than carving into a tablet, though, we're making movies of him and flooding cinemas to follow his adventures. I wonder what the ancient Greeks would make of Matt Damon playing the Greek hero. Archaeology really does take us on a journey sometimes. Or perhaps an Odyssey? Oof, I think that's probably a sign we need to wrap this up. Thank you for watching, and let me know in the comments. Where do you think Homer's Ithaca is? Was Odysseus real? And which sites and characters from the Odyssey are you excited to see in the film? In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit that bell, and thank you for joining us at the Archaeologist Notebook.